Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back when you use it to buy the new Apple Vision Pro or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.50% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
Hey there, working listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Working Overtime, the bi-weekly advice-focused Watch What Happens Live to Working's Real Housewives. I'm your host, June Thomas.
And I am your other host, Isaac Butler. So, June, what have you got for us today?
Well, Isaac, I want to talk about the do's and don'ts of seeking advice from people who have enjoyed success in a field you want to get into. I want to say up front that this topic was inspired by the January 19th issue of Jeff Pearlman's email newsletter, The Yang Slinger. We'll include a link to that newsletter in the show page. Pearlman is a very successful sports writer who has shifted into writing books about sports. It's a good newsletter. He puts a lot of time and thought into every issue, and I recommend it to anyone interested in journalism and sports and the intersections of those things. Here, though, I also want to note that Pearlman said something really, really tone deaf when a horrifically large number of journalists were laid off at several publications in late January. He said that journalists, quote, have to make themselves indispensable. A piece of advice that might have been useful in 1999, but is almost laughably out of date and out of touch today. A whole lot of people who have been incredibly hardworking, incredibly entrepreneurial, and very smart, and very indispensable, have been made unemployed in this awful business. So I guess I would just note that Pearlman's guidance isn't always reliable, to say the least, but I do think he shared some useful wisdom when it comes to this particular topic, so I still want to talk about it. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, just because you give bad advice sometimes doesn't mean you don't also give good advice. I'm sure we've occasionally given or will give bad advice, so I hope listeners will be forgiving with us as well.
What a thought. I'm not sure. I could argue with that, but that is not the point, so I won't. So, yes, Isaac.
Well, I really meant you. I didn't mean me, to be clear. I would never give bad advice. Yeah, just to be clear. I was trying to be generous, June.
Awesome. Understood. Okay. So the reason Pearlman was talking about asking for help on this topic was that he received an email from a college student who was nearing graduation. And Pearlman says that sometimes those emails are useless and annoying and self-defeating. And this was one of those. And he breaks it down to try to help people who are seeking advice so that they can do so in an effective way. In this episode, I want to talk about the right and wrong ways to seek advice from people. Not so much in journalism or sports writing, Pearlman has that covered, but in other creative fields. And I also want to take a moment here to say that here on Working Overtime, we want your questions. You can ask us anything about being an artist in whatever genre. The kind of advice seeking I'm talking about today is when you effectively cold email someone who is undoubtedly successful in their field. The equivalent of a, wannabe movie director getting Martin Scorsese's email address, or a young playwright scoring Tony Kushner's. So it's quite specific. But first, Isaac, is this something you've ever done in any of your creative worlds? Have you ever reached out to a writer or a theatre professional you admired to seek advice?
I will be honest, as I've said a few times on this show, asking for help, even from people I know very well, is something I struggle with a lot. I've gotten much, much better at it, but particularly as a young person, it was a real challenge. So it is very seldom that I've reached out in that way. I've been very lucky to be friends with more established artists throughout both my theater and writing career. And so in casual conversation, I have certainly brought up things I want advice on, but I've never cold written an email to a stranger for that purpose, just because I don't think I got comfortable asking for help in any kind of formal way until I was already a little more established. But there was one time in which I cold wrote, some by snail mail, some by email, a bunch of directors looking for work as an assistant. And I actually did get one ADing gig out of that. But the director turned out to be, I think the word I'm going to carefully choose here is colorful.
Wow. It sounds like there's a story there, but hopefully we'll get back to that at some point in the future over a beer. I hope you learned something from that experience anyway. I don't think I have either. I have been lucky enough to have some mentors who've been hugely helpful. Shout out to Jack Schaefer. But I found them through work rather than by cold emailing them. I have, however, received some of the kinds of emails we're talking about, so I have a little experience with this. All right, let's spend a bit of time talking about the things Pearlman advises. These are, in no particular order, do some research about the person you're talking to. Why does this matter? Well, if you reach out to someone, you're asking for their time, the thing that everyone lacks most of all these days. And you really do need to earn their time by showing that you have made a bit of an effort yourself. Honestly, flatter them a bit. And for the record, spelling their name right really isn't flattery. Show your commitment to the field you say you're so interested in by making some observations, but don't go in super negative, just trashing stories or writers or whatever it is you're talking about. I do want to get to the do's soon, Isaac, but do you have any thoughts on these don'ts?
Yeah, I mean, if you're cold contacting someone to ask for advice, these are great. You know, anytime you're contacting someone, you want to make it clear that you are familiar with them and their work, and you're not just reaching out because you Googled richest showrunners or whatever. Particularly in the arts, you want to make it clear that you have a dedication to the art form, and this isn't just about having a career or making money. A lot of people in the arts get very hinky around careerism, even though they are themselves driven. In order to end up where they are, they had to be, you know? Yep. You don't want to turn this into a purely transactional affair, in part because you have almost nothing to give them on your side of the transaction other than feeling good about themselves. Don't go on too long. Don't be negative. Don't use ChatGPT or other AI things to generate the letter. Write it from the heart. Know your shit.
Oh, good advice. The most important point I think that Pearlman and all the writers he consulted made is to ask for something useful. Don't ask about things the person you're writing to has no experience of, like asking writers about things that pertain to broadcast journalism. And worst of all, don't ask for jobs or internships. Here's a public service announcement. You do not get internships, and certainly not jobs in journalism, by sending emails to writers. Don't do that. It's pointless and a huge waste of a potential opportunity. If you have a chance to have some kind of meaningful exchange with someone, use it wisely. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we'll talk about requests you can make that might actually result in your picking up some useful advice.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back when you use it to buy the new Apple Vision Pro or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.50% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Let's meet our expert.
Hi, I'm Ian Khan. I'm a technology futurist, speaker, and author, and I love to help organizations measure their current state of readiness for an AI-driven world. I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, our finance team is top-notch, but small. How can AI support them? Signed, Financially Drained.
Well, financially drained. A lot is happening in finance and AI, and the possibilities are endless. First of all, AI can help your finance team analyze massive amounts of financial data faster than any human or a team of people could do. Second, it can help perform functions on data through algorithms. This can connect different systems together and really simplify decision-making for your finance team. And last but not least, AI can help reduce the time needed for data to provide insights so that your leaders can make faster decisions.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
Hey listeners, Isaac Butler here. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I would just like to encourage you to write us or call us. Get in touch if you have questions, advice that you need, advice that you want to give, successes you've had, things you want to yell at us about. We love hearing from you. You can email us at working@slate.com, or even better, call us and leave a message at 304-933-9675. That's 304-933-WORK.
And we're back. Okay, so don't ask for jobs, but what should you ask? I would say that's the whole point here. You should only reach out to someone when there's something specific you want to know and you think they can tell you or help you figure it out. And the more specific you can be, the better. Just as you shouldn't ask for a job, don't ask for generic advice. Like, what advice would you give someone interested in? That's just one of those questions that turns everyone's mind to mush. About what? It's just too general. Similarly,
don't take any wooden nickels.
I know, that's the
advice that starts coming into my head when I get that question. It's like, a stitch in time saves 9.
Okay. These are very good pieces of advice, but don't ask just for advice. Also, don't ask for feedback without saying what precisely you want feedback on. I remember working with a keen young writer when I was Slate's foreign editor. She did some stories for me, and especially at the beginning of our professional relationship, there would be quite a bit of editorial back and forth because she didn't know our style, she was just starting out. And also, editorial back and forth is how stories get good. But when we closed a piece, she would always send me an email saying, "Do you have any feedback? I really want to learn." And I would tell her the edit was my feedback. I really appreciated her commitment to getting better. So it wasn't the request that bugged me. It was the generic nature of it. Tell me what you want feedback on, and I will happily provide it. Isaac, I remember when we first relaunched Working, we were concerned that when we asked for questions from listeners, we'd mostly hear from people asking how to get an agent. As it happens, getting representation really hasn't been something listeners have written to working@slate.com about. But do people ask you in person? And if so, do you have a standard answer?
That's funny. I had forgotten about that. But yes, our former co-host, the great author Ruman Alam, was very concerned about that.
Yeah.
In large part, I think, because, he speaks at a lot of literary conferences and festivals, and a lot of aspiring writers go to that, and they all try to get your agent's phone number for whatever reason. Just in case you're listening to this show and you're wondering, how do I get an agent? Let me lay it out for you. There's no magic trick. Okay. You have to have something you want to sell first. There's no point in querying an agent when you do not already have a book or book proposal ready. Then you have to find the right people to query. A really good place to start is looking at the acknowledgments of recent books you like, or if you're on social media, people post their deal announcements when they've sold a book, and it will say the name of their agent on it. And if it's a writer you like, check that out. Then you go to their website, or the website of their agency, I should say. Their contact information will be there. It will say whether or not they are open to submissions. It will say what kind of submissions they are looking for, and it will say how to submit, like what to submit. Is it a letter in one chapter? Is it a letter in 50 pages? What is it? This is what I'm going to say. You have to obey all of those instructions. Yes. If they say they are looking for literary nonfiction, do not send them a chapter of your high fantasy novel. It's just a waste of everyone's time and of paper. So then you want to write a letter that is snappy. It makes the project sound exciting. It's not needy. It's human. It's not like, "Dear sir or madam, I am writing to apply for an agent." It should sound like, "Hey, I've got this great book. You're going to love it. I'm a human being. Here's some stuff about me that you don't know. here's a great pitch for the book. Here's the chapter of the book. Then you just need to know that the next thing that's going to happen is it will wind up in the slush pile, and it will stay in the slush pile until someone gets around to reading it. Someone will get around to reading it, but it could take a long time, and you have to be patient. Now, if you have a friend, and I mean a friend, not like someone you have a parasocial relationship with, but an actual friend who is a writer, it is totally fine to ask them for their agent's contact info. Almost all writers will pass that along. They often found their agents through the same way. They want to pay it forward. It's very standard, so don't be weird about it. And if the person says no, they'll usually have a good reason, like they're not actually open to submissions right now, or genuinely, I love your work, but I don't think they're the right agent for you. Maybe you should talk to this other person, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that, this may seem really obvious, but it's shocking how often people ask about things that are easily Googleable. Do not ask a successful person to tell you something you can find yourself with a simple web search. The sports writing brain trust that Pearlman consulted said, a lot of them, that they were open to giving feedback on pieces when they're kind of going back and forth with young writers in their case. That makes sense. Writers like to talk about writing. They like to tell people, what they liked and didn't like, what they think works and doesn't, where the writer could improve. But again, be considerate of the person that you have found a way to contact. Send them one story or maybe a couple of short pieces. Send appropriate material, as you say, Isaac. Don't send poetry to a political journalist or the first chapter of your romantasy novel to a sports writer. Isaac, have people ever sent pieces to you for critique?
June, I'm just going to call BS on Pearlman here. I do not think that his council of sports writing friends are open to critiquing random stuff that people email them, who they've never heard of and have no relationship with. I just don't think that's true. I don't know a single writer who would do that because everyone is just way, way, way too busy. I certainly do that for friends and for former students. Often I offer because people are shy about it. I have a friend who's working on a book proposal right now. We went out to coffee to talk the ins and outs of book proposals. And I said, hey, when it's done, when you're ready to have eyes on it, send it to me. I want to give you notes on it. I've done this a couple times. It's a weird thing to write. You've written one. They're really weird. I've written 3, 2 of which actually turned into books, 1 of which did not. And, let's talk about it. Or sometimes I'll be like, hey, here's a copy of one of my book proposals. I just don't think you should send something to someone to critique unless you already have some kind of relationship with them where you think that would be a good idea. And you should always ask first because
yes.
June, you and I are friends. We've been friends for years now. We've been coworkers for years as well. If you were to send me a piece, of course I would read. But if we only knew each other a little bit and you were like, just sent something to me, I would be like, oh yeah, I'll look at it. And then I'd just be filled with guilt and anxiety the whole time because I don't really have time to look at it. But that's why asking before is really useful.
Yes, to be clear, in the scenario that they were talking about, there was some kind of entree, there was some kind of introduction, there was definitely agreement that this was cool. And I do think there is something that you mentioned earlier, this desire to pay it forward. Many of us had some kind of help, whether it was kind of explicitly mentoring or just somebody just kind of ended up in that role. Somebody gave us a piece of advice and we want to kind of return it. So that was a little bit more of the scenario that they were talking about. Yeah, do not just cold email people.
And let me briefly say to the more established people out there, like someone read your pieces at some point, you know what I mean? Like you should try to pay it forward if you can. I really believe that. There was a moment where the screenwriter of the film A History of Violence wrote a piece, I think, for the Village Voice called No, I Won't Read Your Screenplay that sort of started with the idea of like, if you come up to me at a film conference and hand me your screenplay, of course I'm not going to read it, but it sort of expanded, if I remember correctly, this was years ago, to, he's not going to read anyone's screenplay. Like you might be a friend of his and he's not going to read it or whatever. And people got justifiably very mad at that because it's like, we all have a duty to the art form to help the next generation come up. I really genuinely believe that. People help me, and so I really think it's my job to help other people when I can and within reason.
Yeah, in the right context. All right, we'll be back with some final thoughts about seeking advice from successful people after this. This episode is brought to you by Splunk. You need to keep operations humming around the clock, but potential disruptions are everywhere. Splunk helps you predict problems and find and fix issues fast so you can reduce risk and ditch downtime. The world's largest enterprises rely on Splunk's unified security and observability platform to become more efficient, resilient, and innovative. With Splunk, you can react quickly, evolve faster, and be ready for anything. Stay ahead of disruptions. Learn more at splunk.com/resilience.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverage you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies, all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back when you use it to buy the new Apple Vision Pro or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.50% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
Hey, it's Isaac Butler again. I'm sure you really missed me interrupting the show, so I'm here to interrupt it again to tell you, please, if you are enjoying this podcast, do not forget to subscribe. And if you already subscribe and you're thinking, well, what else can I do? You could rate the podcast. You could review the podcast. Wherever you are getting your podcast, you do those things. It actually really does help new listeners to find us because the algorithms use all that stuff in ways that I don't completely understand, but apparently it works. If you've done all of those things, another thing you could consider doing is going to slate.com/workingplus and signing up for our premium tier. You'll be supporting what we do right here at Working. You'll get behind the paywall at the mothership site. You get all sorts of other bonus goodies. It's really easy. Sign up today, slate.com/workingplus. All right, now back to our show.
Okay, some last thoughts on this question. I guess I want to say you don't have to ask a question. If you find a way to, get something to a person you admire, it's okay just to send a fan letter if that's what you really want to do. Unless you genuinely have a question that you think the person could help you with, don't feel the need to ask one. Just tell them you enjoy their work and move on. Also, this comes back to what I think is the key element in all of this, having something you really want to know. Think about whether the famous person is the best person to ask that question of. If you have a query about the sound of a particular segment of This American Life, ask a producer. Don't ask Ira Glass. He's probably not the best source for that information anyway. Isaac, any last thoughts?
Well, I'd just say we've thrown out a lot of info, a lot of do's and don'ts. I think that's all good advice, but do not let it make you too nervous. The person you're writing to has been in your position before, and hopefully that means they will approach this interaction with some amount of decency and humility. And if you don't get a response or get a negative response, do not take it personally. It doesn't mean your career is over. It might just mean that person's a jerk. It might mean they're too busy. It really probably doesn't have anything to do with you. So just pick yourself up and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of humility, don't forget to show some yourself, especially if you are someone who hasn't yet established themselves in the field in which your potential advice giver is, maybe a big star, but just maybe somebody pretty established. Focus on them instead of yourself. Sure, tell them a bit about yourself. As you said, Isaac, show your commitment to the field. But you're asking for advice, not a date or a new parent. So, keep it brief and relevant. You don't have to big yourself up. That's not the point of this.
Totally. I mean, I guess what we're really saying a lot of it comes down to be a human being, treat the other person as a human being. Think about how you would want this letter to read if you were in their shoes. You know, the golden rule is useful in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe that actually is something to think about as you're putting together this letter. If this is something that you end up doing, maybe one day you will receive such a letter. Put yourself in that position. Maybe that will help you to pitch it appropriately, to ask an appropriate question. Maybe one day you'll be the person receiving these emails or whatever kind of communication we'll be getting by that point.
Brain mail, right? They'll just go like, beep, doot,
brain mail.
and it'll just zoom through the ether to your mind.
Yeah. Have your robot contact my robot, okay, Isaac?
Precisely.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode, but let me leave you with one last piece of advice. I think you should subscribe to Working wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have ideas for things we could do better, questions you'd like us to address, something you'd just like to tell us about, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at working@slate.com or give us a ring at 304-933-WORK.
If you'd like to support what we do, sign up for Slate Plus at slate.com/working plus. You'll get bonus content, including exclusive episodes of Slow Burn and Dakota Ring, and you'll be supporting what we do right here on Working.
Thank you, as always, to Kevin Bendis, who produces Working Overtime, and to our series producer, Cameron Drews. They give us amazing advice every single episode. We'll be back on Sunday with a brand new episode of Working, and in 2 weeks, we'll have another Working Overtime. Until then, get back to work.